Okay, so moving right along, let's look at some of the arterial supply. Um, sorry, let's look at the arterial supply of the neck all the way up into the brain. And so I'm going to basically put some of the neck information from lecture 19 onto this at the same time, just to kind of kill two lectures with one video, basically. And I'm going to use this coloring page that I usually give to some of my other students just to make my life a little easier in terms of drawing. You don't have to know what all these numbers mean. I'm just going to show you some basic things. So what is down here is the heart. Okay, so the heart is actually going to move blood up through a blood vessel called the aorta. And actually, I gotta change my heart position just a little bit. You guys have learned dorsal aorta, right? So the dorsal aorta actually comes off of the heart and it's going to bring blood up towards the head and the neck and before it goes back down the dorsal aorta. So blood's going to travel basically through what's called the aortic arch and then up through three blood vessels that actually supply towards the upper limb and then the head and the neck. One of those blood vessels is called the common carotid. So this right here is the common carotid. And in this case, this is actually the right common carotid because it's coming off of number 2, which is called brachiocephalic artery. Not important to know, but you should know number 10 is common carotid. So common carotid is the deep artery that's going to run parallel right here to the larynx and the hyoid bone. It's underneath all of these, muscles that we talked about in the neck. And what's going to happen is it's going to eventually split. So actually higher up here, kind of where the angle of the mandible is, what we're going to see is it's going to split. And when it does, it is going to go internal. And that becomes number 11. This is internal carotid. And it splits and goes outside towards the superficial portions of the head. And that's number 12 is external carotid. So it's important to understand that you have a common carotid that branches into internal and external. Internal carotid goes through the carotid canal right there. And when it does, it comes up into the brain and it's going to supply towards the inferior aspect of the brain, supplying blood primarily to the middle and the front of the brain. And then also coming off here, so this is actually not brachiocephalic anymore, but coming off of an artery called the subclavian artery. What we're going to see is a smaller branching artery right there that's going through the transverse foramen of the cervical vertebra. And when it does, it comes all the way up to the foramen magnum. So number 9 is vertebral artery. The vertebral arteries are paired, and when they come together, they create one single artery that will be running basically right up, along the top of the pons, and that's called the basilar artery. And that supplies to the back of the brain. So I'm going to show you how to draw the cerebral arterial circle, or also what's commonly referred to as the circle of Willis, on the inferior aspect of the brain here that I have a nice little line diagram of. I'm going to start at the back here where we're going to see that we're going to have these two blood vessels that come off kind of in a U shape, right, like that. And those are the vertebral. Oh, sorry about my handwriting. Let me rewrite that so it's a little clearer. So those are the vertebral arteries. Then the vertebral arteries fuse together, and when they fuse together, they make that one single common artery, and this is the basilar artery. So what you're going to see is that the basilar artery helps supply to the back portion, and the first thing we see is that there's going to be an artery that kind of branches off and goes this way, back here, following the transverse fissure, just like that. So it kind of goes past the pons, it goes back past the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and this becomes our posterior cerebral artery. Okay. And And maybe I'll make my other ones in a slightly different red color. So what we're going to see is that the common carotid is going to come probably like right about here-ish, and like it's coming up at the base of the brain, and then it's going to branch off. And when it branches off, it's going to branch off and go towards the medial side here underneath the longitudinal sulcus, I'm sorry, the lateral sulcus, right underneath the temporal lobe, just right there. And then it's also going to branch off and come anterior like that. Okay, so this becomes our middle cerebral artery. And then these are the anterior cerebral arteries. So make sure that this is a nice circle. Essentially what we need to do is we need to be able to make them all come together. And so I'm gonna do this using a slightly different color so that you see there's a nice little artery that's going to pull the anterior cerebral arteries together. This is the anterior communicating artery. And then there's going to be another artery right here and right here that basically bring the posterior cerebral artery to the middle cerebral artery, and these are the posterior communicating arteries. And so that's what creates this nice circle. So let me go back over this all in one color so that you can see how we have a nice circle that's going around like that, basically around where the pituitary gland is, where the sella turcica is going to create that nice circle of Willis, or the cerebral arterial circle. And this allows for us to send blood in all directions. So blood can either flow posterior and then it flows all the way around back posterior, or blood can actually flow from the middle and go anterior and then flow backwards posterior. So this allows for blockage to occur. If there's, let's say there's a blockage, like right about there in the anterior cerebral artery, you're going to see that here the internal carotid can still supply here, and then blood's going to flow all that direction. And even if blood gets blocked in that direction, we still have another carotid artery that can continue to supply all the way over and supply up, just like that. Okay. So how can you draw this easier? Well, you could just draw a circle. There's your cerebral arterial circle, just like that. And then it's really easy. You just make like an arm coming off the middle. So this is internal carotid. I'm just going to abbreviate. Don't abbreviate on a test, right? Remember, this will be middle cerebral artery, just like that. And then basically you kind of just want to have two little kind of arms that come off anterior, and this will be our anterior cerebral artery. That makes this the anterior communicating. And then what we need to do is we need to have like vertebral coming off. Vertebral is going to come this way. And then basically you need to see that you have another two set of legs right there. I don't know, maybe it looks like a person with a big head and two antennae sticking off, and I don't know, whiskers coming out. Sort of depends on what you see. This will be posterior cerebral. And then this is posterior communicating. With this being basilar and this being vertebral. So actually drawing this whole cerebral arterial circle is not really that bad. You draw a circle, and then you're going to put two things coming out anterior, two things coming out medial, two things coming out posterior. And it should all wrap around in that nice, perfect circle. And the posterior stuff, you should probably have three things because don't forget about that basilar artery, basically. So it's our nice arterial supply to our brain. Remember, this is how oxygen and nutrients get to the brain to feed all of those neurons when they're doing when they're sending messages, when they need to make energy in order to use their sodium potassium pumps.